Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where today we're in Matthew chapter 7, talking about judging not that you be not judged, which is a passage that is often misquoted or misunderstood, whether intentionally or unintentionally. People like to reference this one, and people like to reference it poorly, so we're going to talk about it instead. We are nearing the end of this series through the Sermon on the Mount, and soon I will have to choose something else to preach on Sunday nights, so that will be interesting. I guess we'll get there when we get there. For now, we have probably 3 more sermons from the Sermon on the Mount this year. In Matthew 7, we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 6, and then next week, or rather 2 weeks, next time I'm preaching on the Sermon on the Mount, verses 7 through 14, and then the rest of it, 15 through 29. I think that's how it'll break down, although I'm not exactly sure yet, and we'll see when the time comes. Here we've got this line, "Judge not that you be not judged," and that's really the phrase that we're going to be dealing with right now. In the kingdom of heaven, one of the important things Jesus addresses here at the end is this idea of judgment, how you do it, how you don't do it, and maybe when the situation calls for it and when it kind of doesn't. When to judge, when not to judge, and then ultimately what the consequences are for judging when judgment is ignored. Like, how do you understand the end of these things? You're called to judge, or maybe you're not. You're called not to judge, or maybe you are. And even if you are, or maybe you aren't, what happens if you do it anyway? And what's the fallout of you judging and the consequences of it? There's kind of a big conversation here, and a lot of people shorthand it to just be "judge not that you be not judged," which is a gross disservice to the passage. When you only read verse 1 and you don't actually read the passage itself, you rip that out of context and you ignore what Jesus is actually saying. We've all heard the line before, "Judge not that you be not judged," and we've heard it in different contexts, because people will say this just because they do. Sometimes we say it as a joke. I like to say it as a joke. Whenever someone says they disapprove of one of my opinions or whatever it is, well, judge not that you be not judged, right? You can disagree, but if you disagree, then I can disagree with you, or whatever it is. It's one of those joking things. Maybe it is just, hey, just a sarcastic little comment. It's not really something that I believe it means exactly that, but I'm just saying it because I can say it. Some people use it as a deflection when they have actually done something wrong, and when they kind of feel bad about it, if they are ever confronted, well, you do bad things too, so don't judge me and I won't judge you, right? Now, don't think about that too much. Don't go after me for it. They say it as a deflection, and either way, you've ended up hearing it. Is that what Jesus is saying? Is he saying this as kind of a sarcastic joke? Is he saying this as kind of a deflection for bad things that he's done? Well, obviously not. So what exactly is Jesus trying to say? That's what we're going to dive into. One preemptive question that we should ask before we actually get into it is, what does Jesus mean by judging here? And you'll see this as we read verses 1 through 6 in just a moment. I believe what Jesus means by judging is how you deal with and how you correct other people, because especially when you get to verse 5, he's talking about making sure that you can take the speck out of your brother's eye. In other words, if your brother has a problem, make sure that you are able to communicate that to him, or maybe even help him deal with the issue. That's the idea of judgment here. We're not just talking about a verbal thing. We're not talking about like physical punishment or something like that. We're not talking about judges who sit in a courtroom and have the official role of judging. We're talking about someone who is communicating and working with another person to correct some wrong or some foolishness that the other person has gotten up to. But there is an order to these things, and Jesus is very clear on this. Before you jump on someone else for being so terrible, make sure you examine yourself, because you may be guilty of the very thing you accuse other people of. Matthew chapter 7, let's read verses 1 through 6. "Do not judge, so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' and look, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Verses 1 through 5 seem to fit together really well, and then verse 6 is also there. I think verse 6 plays into verses 1 through 5. Some people would apply it as a separate section entirely. Some people would apply it starting in verse 7. I think it goes with 1 through 5, and I'll try to make that argument in the third section that we get to. What happens when you do judge? What is the natural consequence of that? Verse 6 has something to say about it, and that's where I think it fits in. You can disagree with that, and, hear me out and then disagree with that all you want to. That one's up to you. What you are asking here is, Jesus is addressing two different sides of this question. He says, judge not that you be not judged, but realistically within that there are two basic kind of understandings he's going after. One is a question of when you shouldn't judge. There are situations in which you should not be judging people, but there are also situations in which you should be judging people, and when you read through this section, hopefully you get a picture of both of them. Jesus begins by saying, do not judge. And when you pull that, just the verse itself, chapter 7, verse 1, when you pull that out of context, it does really sound absolute. You shouldn't judge at all. But we have to go a little bit deeper than that. Why should we not judge? Or what situation is Jesus addressing? Is this an absolute command that I should just never judge? Or is this specifically, you shouldn't judge in this kind of situation? Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way in which you judge, you will be judged. Interesting. Context means some things. And so we'll look at that more, especially when we look at the second section, which is when you should be judging. But right now, just this idea, when should we not judge? Well, in verse 1, and verses 3 and 4 is primarily where this is taken from. In verse 1, we're told that we will be judged if we judge other people, which means the fundamental understanding coming into this is if you are not fit to judge, you should not be judging people. In other words, if you are not living righteously, you don't have a right to judge people. You can't be living in a way that is holier than thou and expect you're going to get away with it. God is not going to look favorably on people who besmirch and look down on other people and pass judgment on other people for how evil those other people are, especially when they themselves are just as evil as the people they are condemning. The basic command that Jesus is communicating here is not, don't judge in any circumstance. It is, do not judge when you are guilty. Do not judge someone else for doing something evil when you're doing that exact same thing. The basic command is look at yourself. Self-examine. Make sure that you are right. You can judge when you don't have a problem anymore. But a lot of times we like passing judgment and harsh judgment on people who are doing the bad things that we ourselves are often guilty of. The best thing, the most important thing you can do is to correct yourself and not others. You can correct others eventually. Sure, there's an important role for that. We'll get to that later on. But the most important thing you can do is make sure that you personally are right with God, which means you don't judge others, judge yourself. And then after you judge yourself, maybe then there's a place for helping judge others and helping guide them towards what's right. It's very easy to end up in a situation which is explained in verses 3 and 4. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the log that's in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, and look, the log is in your own eye? Jesus is drawing a little bit of hyperbole to kind of make a strong point here. How easy is it to slip into this mode of verses 3 and 4 where you're attempting to help someone else while your own life is absolutely overrun with corruption? Now, it's very noble to help other people. It's very noble to help them improve. In some ways, it is absolutely the good and righteous thing to do, to look at somebody else and say, hey, you clearly have a problem Let me point that out to you. Let me help you with that. Let me help you correct or push you in the right direction, or however you want to phrase it, whatever exactly you're talking about. It is noble for me to try and help someone else. But it is not noble for me to ignore my own improvement and try to fix someone else's problem when I have that exact same problem and just kind of sit there and laugh about it. If I don't tend to myself, if I don't check myself before I go out and correct others, what gives me the right to correct others? Why should I correct others? How can I correct others if I myself am unrighteous? 1 Timothy brings up this point. Paul, writing in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, I believe it is, at the end of this chapter, Paul is talking to Timothy specifically, one of his protégés. He's talking to Timothy especially about how Timothy should deal with himself, how he should live, how he should act. Chapter 4, in verse 6, and pointing these things out, you'll be, to the brothers and sisters, you'll be a good servant of Christ Jesus, constantly nourished on the words of faith and of the good doctrine which you have been following. In other words, you need to have been following a doctrine, and you are going to be pointing these things out. These are things for Timothy to do. But he ends the chapter in chapter 4 and verse 16, pay close attention to yourself and to the teaching. Persevere in these things, for as you do this, you will save both yourself and those who hear you. In other words, Timothy, what's the most important thing? Make sure that you are correct. Verse 15, take pains with these things. Context for verse 16. Take pains with these things. Be absorbed in them so that your progress may be evident to all. Pay close attention to yourself and to your teaching. In other words, make sure that you are correct, especially if you're going to be a teacher, especially if you're going to be someone who is correcting someone else. You have to make sure that your life is correct. Paul talks in other places about how he needs to make sure that he is in control of himself. He buffets his body just in case, even if after I preach to people, even if after I help other people find heaven, I myself might be disqualified. One of the reasons being a teacher incurs a stricter judgment is we teach people what is wrong. That's a James 3 and verse 1 concept, I think. Let not many of you be teachers, because you incur a stricter judgment on yourselves. Why? Because one of the reasons is a teacher has to correct you when you're wrong. And if the teacher himself is in the wrong, then suddenly you make yourself a bit of a hypocrite. When Jesus says in verse 5, you hypocrite, first take out the log from your own eye, back to Matthew 7 in verse 5, you hypocrite, what are you doing? You're trying to fix someone else while you yourself are evil. God doesn't approve of that. Why would you think God approves of that? If you don't watch yourself, if you don't watch your own teaching, how is it that you think you're going to be fit to help anyone else? Jesus tells it by means of this kind of ludicrous statement. Take the speck out of or take the log out of your own eye so that you can take the speck out of your brother's. It doesn't do you much good to try and do eye surgery on someone else when you yourself are blind. Others have described it as someone has like a pinch of sawdust in his eye, whereas you, the teacher, have this massive 2x4 coming out of your face, and you can't even see it. How do you think you're going to get close enough to the other person to help them when, in fact, you are just slapping them around with the beam coming out of your own eye? When you are crippled in this way, when you are full of evil yourself, how do you think you're going to help anyone else? Like, realistically, how do you think that's going to be a benefit to anyone else? It's not practical for you to do that. You can't do that. How can I fix someone else's problem when I've got a massive problem in my own life that I am blind to, or that I'm ignoring, or that I'm fine to let the problem exist in my life? I'm fine to be sinful. I just have to help everybody else not be sinful. How do you fix others' problems when you can't even see straight yourself? There's a question there. That's really important. If you're going to judge, well, when should you not judge? Don't judge when you are the one who is at fault, or when you have a massive problem that you're not putting any effort in to try and fix. Now, there is a question the speck in the log. Some people would look at this and say Jesus is reprimanding those who have massive issues, and basically, if my neighbor has a small problem, if my brother has a very small problem, but I have a massive problem, then I shouldn't correct him. But if my neighbor has a middling-sized problem and I have just a little problem, then that's fine, because the relative scale of things, I'm much more able to see. I'm not blinded by the huge amount of problem in my life. I'm only blinded by the small amount of problem in my life. So therefore, it's fine. It's fine for me to judge someone if they have more of a log than I do. But I don't really think that's what Jesus is talking about, is it? Is Jesus comparing who has the objectively bigger problem? And, if I take 5 milligrams of drugs and you take 10 milligrams of drugs, well, I can condemn you, but you can't condemn me because you have a bigger problem than I do, or something like that. I don't even know how drugs work. Is it milligrams? I don't think that's the right measurement, but whatever. All my viewing of Breaking Bad did not educate me on how you actually take the stuff. That's probably good. The point is hopefully clear. It's not about the difference exactly. It's not about if this person has a problem that's 10 times as bad as yours, then you can judge them. But if it's less than that, then you can't judge them. Jesus isn't specifying anything about that. Jesus isn't saying if your problem is 10 times worse than someone else, you can't judge them. But if you have the same problem as someone else, then you can judge them. Jesus never specifies any of these things. Instead, I think it's more just a statement about unawareness or purposeful ignorance. If you are just not willing to work on it, if you have a problem and you're not taking steps to fix it yourself, you have no right to tell others how to fix their problems, because you are you have an issue. You're the one who needs the fixing. How can you go out and work on someone else's car when your own car is broken and you can't fix it? If you have something that's messed up, then how do you have a right to go and tell other people how to fix their own thing? This is one reason why in some elderships I know of people who have been elders formerly, or people who could be elders. They have all of these qualifications lined up, but they have a child who has gone wayward, and they take that they take that qualification for having faithful children to be some people would say that's an extreme. Some people are willing to be, I'm not explaining this very well. Some men are willing to be elders because they raised their children well, and then their children grow up and leave the house and go and do whatever they want to, and they're not faithful to God anymore. And yet the men continue being elders because they raised those children. It seems like they raised them fine. Those children just have free will and have made bad choices, and so the man can continue being elders. I know other men who have been elders, or who could be elders by every other definition, but because they have even one wayward child, they say, no, I'm not going to be an elder, because how can I teach someone else? How can I be a leader in the church when I can't even lead my own family and keep them faithful? How can I go out and teach others how to educate their children when I can't even teach my own, and my own don't even listen to me? How can I do that one thing? How can I be the leader from this perspective when I can't even do the little thing? In other words, how can I tell you to fix the speck that's in your eye when there's a log that's in my eye that is so clear that I haven't been able to fix? I don't really have I don't have a strong preference between those two readings of eldership. I know plenty of good elders with children who are lost, and I know plenty of good elders or people who used to be elders who stepped away when their children walked away. Both of those are noble. I'll need to study 1 Timothy because I haven't really thought about that too much. And so, we'll leave that question there, but that's one reason why some men may opt out of that when they are aware of their problem, when they are aware that their family needs saving, and if they can't even save their family, what gives them a right to be over God's family? There is a valid point to be made there. Be careful how you judge. Be careful. Make sure you judge yourself first. If you have a massive problem, that needs fixing before you go out and fix anyone else. This is not to say you have to be perfect before you give advice. Paul was not perfect. Peter was not perfect. Even in the New Testament, Well, of course, Peter's only in the New Testament, but even when you get post Jesus, Jesus goes back to heaven. Not like it's post Jesus, because he's still alive. I hope you get the point. When Jesus is not on earth anymore, in the same way, he still is, here with his people, but he's also not here physically in the same way. When he ascends up to heaven, Peter takes charge, and in many ways is one of the leaders of the apostles. The apostles are all leaders in their own right, but Peter seems to head up the group a little bit. Not that he's the Pope. Go and read the Bible if you believe that Peter is the first Pope. There are a bunch of different problems with that. Go read Matthew 16, like an actual reading, not through the lens of whatever your old teaching has been. Regardless, Peter, in many ways, steps up to be a leader among the apostles. He sticks around in the church in Jerusalem for a while. A lot of the other apostles go to different regions and start preaching there, but Peter sticks around centrally located for a little bit. Even he has problems. Galatians chapter 2, I believe it is, Paul has to come and yell at Peter because Peter goes to a group, he is eating with Jews and Gentiles equally, and then there's this instance where suddenly the Jews come in, a new group of Jews come in, and Peter starts rejecting the Gentiles and only eating with the Jews. And so Galatians chapter 2, Paul has to come and condemn Peter to his face, or I opposed Peter to his face because he stood condemned. Why? Because he segregated among the church and was only eating with the Jews instead of the Gentiles. He had rejected the teaching of God and instead gone back to the things that he used to hold to back when he was very strongly Jewish, back before the church was open to Gentiles, or was at least proclaimed very broadly among the Gentiles. Does that mean that Peter's not able to teach? No, he made a mistake. He made a misstep, a sin. That was evil. Sure, Paul comes in and confronts him. It's not like Paul's perfect either. Paul has issues too, but Peter comes in and says, sorry, my bad, that was evil, and repents. And then he's still a leader. It's not like you have to be perfect before you can give advice. Peter can give plenty of good advice. Even while he's in sin, Peter can give good advice about any variety of things. But you do have to be trying to be righteous. That's kind of the qualification. If you are someone who is not working on yourself, if you're not caring about the log in your own eye before you go and troubleshoot your brother, then you've got a problem. When should you not judge? When you just don't care about your own personal state of being. If you don't care enough about yourself to make sure that you're righteous, you don't get to care enough about other people to make sure that they're righteous. At that point, that's not righteousness. That's just wanting to yell at other people for what they've been doing. And that's not good anymore. So, don't judge when you are in that kind of situation. But there are opportunities where you are obligated to judge, where you should, where it's good to, and one might even say this is your calling, where you are the person who is supposed to judge. Jesus does start by saying, don't judge, so that you will not be judged. And that does sound absolute, but as you read the context, it does seem like there is a condition to this. Even when you get to verse 5, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. If Jesus says don't judge, then even when I have the log out of my own eye, then I shouldn't take the speck out of my brother's eye. I have no right to do that. I was told not to judge. But Jesus didn't say don't judge, period, ever. Jesus says don't judge when you're not fit to. But once you cleanse yourself, once you are righteous again, once you repent, once you are right with God, then you can judge. And then you should judge. It's not that the speck shouldn't come out of your brother's eye. It's just that you're not going to be the one to operate on your brother if you yourself are blind. Check yourself and then judge other people. Jesus does imply two things. He implies that there is a right way to do it, verse 2, and he also implies that it is expected in verse 5, and those are the two things that we look at right now. Is there a right way to judge? Absolutely, and the way is carefully. Verse 2, if in the way you judge, for in the way you judge you will be judged, and by your standard of measure it will be measured to you. Judge not that you be not judged, for in the way that you judge you will be judged. It's not a blanket command of never judge. It's a warning that says, by the way, when you judge, you are setting up the standard by which you are going to be judged. How you judge dictates how God will judge you. There is a question here. Well, don't judge so that you will not be judged. Okay, so if I just never judge anybody, if I just never say anything is wrong, then when it comes to me at Judgment Day, God will just look at me and say, well, he never thought that anything was wrong, so I guess he's fine. Nothing's wrong to him. And that's not how it works. That's not what Jesus is justifying. No. It's clear that God has a baseline expectation for everyone. You are not going to get rid of your obligation to be righteous by just not holding anyone to any standard of righteousness, and that's not how this works. This is not a rule that will minimize your judgment and zero out how much you are being judged. But this is a rule that may maximize your judgment and increase how harshly God looks at you, I guess is the way to say it. How strictly he's going to examine your life. If you overly judge other people, God will factor that in. If you are overly harsh on other people, God is aware of that, and he will factor that into your judgment. When you are using your judgments to demoralize or beat someone down, God may use his judgments on you to demoralize you and beat you down. When you treat others in an unfair way, God will treat you in an unfair way because that would be fair. Because that's what you did, so that's what you receive. In many ways, this is just do to others as you would have them do unto you. This is eye for eye, tooth for tooth. How you judge, you will be judged. What you do for other people or to other people or against other people will be done for or to or against you. If you are merciful, your Father will be merciful. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. If we are forgiving, then your Father will be forgiving. If you are not forgiving, your Father won't be forgiving. That doesn't mean there aren't standards. That doesn't mean it negates the basic standard of, loving God, loving neighbor, being righteous, and doing all the basic things. It doesn't mean it negates all those things. But if you err on the side of being merciful, maybe God errs on the side of being merciful with you. That's a question. And so we leave that up to God ultimately to be the final judge. We don't have the ultimate say on the eternal fate of anyone except ourselves. So be careful how harshly or how mercifully you're willing to judge. Now, Jesus, yes, there's this right way to judge, right? Be careful how you do so, but he also emphasizes that judgment is expected. You will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. This is something that's going to happen. Failing to judge is not a righteous thing. Some people say, well, I could just not judge and then get away with all sorts of stuff. If I'm just merciful to everyone, if I just never point out that anybody's wrong, then God's not really going to point out that I'm wrong. So, that's balance, that's fair. But that's not true, because God is righteous and God is the judge. God's judgment is righteous. God is praised because his judgments are righteous. And when God steps in to judge, that is called righteousness. When you fail to judge, when you see evil in front of you and don't do anything about it, when you see your brother headed off to sin and you're like, well, see you later, is that not unrighteous? Isn't failing to judge an unrighteous thing? Judgment is part of righteousness. Helping correct others' evil is part of being righteous. Judging too harshly is unrighteous. Yes, there is a balance there, but judging not at all is also unrighteous. God judges, and he judges accurately. He judges fairly. He judges mercifully. If we judge too harshly or we don't judge at all, we have missed the balance of who God is. And that's no longer righteous. You can be judged for not judging. You can be judged for not pursuing righteousness. That's the solution is not to avoid judging entirely. The solution is to judge righteously in the proper order. If there is a problem, I need to fix myself first. And after I fix myself, then I can fix somebody else. After you've accounted for yourself, and you've checked yourself, and you've purified yourself, after you've gone to God and repented and sought forgiveness, after He has forgiven you, then you can start to make a difference to help others see. It's not righteous to just kind of shrug and say, well, we're all bad, so it's okay, right? Just because everybody's bad doesn't mean everybody's good. Syndrome was kind of right when he said if everybody is a superhero, no one's a superhero, it's kind of true in the sense that if everyone is super, no one will be. I believe that's the quote from The Incredibles. If everybody is special, then nobody's really special, but at the same time, we are all still special, right? We all acknowledge that, right? Every human being is a human being, which means we're all just human beings, but it also means we're all not animals. That's pretty cool, right? We're all special from that point of view. When everyone is a sinner, no one's a sinner in the sense of no one is like despicably worse than everybody else, sort of, because we're all messed up. We have all got problems, etc. But at the same time, there are people who are much more despicably messed up than everybody else is, right? There are people who are completely evil. There are people who are sinners. Like, we're all bad, yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't try and be good. That doesn't mean you can't seek righteousness. Just because everybody has sinned doesn't mean that you have to continue in that way, doesn't mean that you have to stay bad. Shrugging and saying everybody's a sinner, so what's the problem? I'm just not going to judge anybody. That doesn't obtain righteousness, right? That doesn't get to where God wants you to be. In fact, what gets you to righteousness is humility and obedience to what God has called you to. Judgment is expected. It's something it needs to happen. It's going to happen. God has given you the tools to judge with, and He said this is a righteous thing to do if you're doing it in the righteous manner. And that's where we just need to be careful and have an eye on ourselves. Keep judgment in the natural order of things. That is to say, check yourself before you wreck yourself, and then check others and help them to be righteous as well. If you see someone's evil, the first thing you should do is not jump on that person for being evil. The first thing you should do is look at yourself. If you see something evil happening out in the world, examine yourself to see where you're at. You see someone who is ungrateful, examine yourself. Make sure that you're being grateful, and then correct them for being ungrateful. When you see someone stealing, examine yourself. Make sure that you haven't stolen. And if you have, seek forgiveness, and then tell them not to steal. If you see someone murdering someone else, make sure that you don't murder, or you don't have that hatred in your heart. If you do, repent and seek forgiveness. And if you don't, or when you don't, when you are forgiven for that, go and tell the other person not to murder, right? There's a natural order to these things. You should not judge if you are not willing to take accountability for your own actions. But you should judge. It's righteous. It's a good thing in the proper context. God just requires you to judge yourself first. Make sure that you are righteous first. And once you have taken accountability for yourself, then you can go and help others. Pray and repent and note your behaviors that need to change. And then, after you've done some self-reflection, then go and help the other person. The primary person who you need to make sure is righteous is yourself. It's not somebody else. The secondary person who you need to make sure is righteous are the other people who are around you. Your family, the Christians, your brethren that you're around, other people in the world, you need to make sure that they're righteous, right? Do what you can to help them be righteous, but also follow after God yourself. If you help everybody else be righteous, but you yourself are lost, you haven't gained anything, and it's not worth it. Primarily, Focus on being righteous yourself. Secondarily, then, as we have opportunity and as a part of being righteous ourselves, we must warn others when they are unrighteous. Ultimately, I'm not responsible for anyone but myself, but I still have an obligation to God that I will try to help other people see righteousness and follow after God in faith. When should you not judge? When you're not willing to troubleshoot yourself. When should you judge? After you have cleansed yourself before God, after you've been forgiven, after you've repented and been forgiven by God, then go and judge, pass judgment. But what happens when your judgment is ignored? Because again, I'm not in charge of other people. I can't run them. I can't tell them what to do. I have no idea what they're going to do. And so how do I respond? What should I expect? And what happens when I say, hey, you're going down a bad path here, and they say no, or they just ignore me? What exactly do I do when judgment is ignored? This is verse 6. Do not give what is holy to dogs. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Years ago, and I guess probably still running, there's a comic strip called Pearls Before Swine. That's about the only connection I have with it. I thought it was funny in bits and pieces at the time. I haven't read it in years. This is, I guess, where he got the line. Pearls before pigs. Pearls before swine. The glorious, great things that are unappreciated by the uncultured beings in front of you. Don't give what is holy to dogs. Dogs will not appreciate it. Don't take your pearls and throw them before the pigs. The pigs don't appreciate it. Pigs are about muck and mud and food, and they're just about all this nasty stuff, right? They're about the very simple baseline animalistic desires, as we would say. Don't give what's holy to them. Don't give them what's valuable, because when you give something that's so valuable to a being that is so incapable of appreciation, it's not going to help them. And actually, I mean, you're jumping in the pig pit to throw stuff in front of them to get them to notice you. They're not going to care about the stuff in front of them, but they will eat you. Pigs are kind of nasty like that. Nasty, disgusting animals. They make good food, but they're nasty animals. Be careful what you're doing. Jesus says here, again, I think verse 6 is related to verses 1 through 5. I don't think it's like this separate section where Jesus is jumping topics. I think it's very much tied in. He's saying be careful in judgment. We are expected to help others, but there is a reality to the situation, which is not everybody's going to appreciate your help. Not everybody's going to accept your help. Not everybody's going to want your help. And actually, sometimes even giving help to other people can be a problem. It can become an issue for you. This verse, it seems a little bit odd, but when you think about it, the concept Jesus is talking about is misallocating something valuable can bring problems for you personally. And it's related to this idea, this righteous judgment. It's tied in right there. I can go to all the effort to purify myself or to let God purify me. I've been tagging back those two ideas, the same idea. I can go to all the effort to seek purification. I can go to all the effort to seek forgiveness. I can go to all the effort to repent and to actually do better and to actually reject sin and not do the evil anymore. I can do that all I want to. I can go to the effort of genuine love for another human being and correct them and say, look, you are not going down the right path here. Maybe I even know that because I've been down this path, and it's not a good path. It's not a good place to be. I can go to all this effort and be a legitimate, loving human being who has solved the problems, who has found the solution, who has given it to God, and God's helped purify me, and I don't have an issue with this anymore. Let me share that with you, and I can be the best person in the world. Take that to another person, another human being, and nothing I do will control how that other person will react, because ultimately you are in charge of your own, every individual is in charge of his or her, yes, there are only two, own responses to situations, and that's important. We're told in passages like Ezekiel 33, verses 7 through 9, Ezekiel is told that his job is to be a watchman to declare what's happening to the people of Israel. If they listen, then great. If they don't listen, then that's their fault. But what we have to do is go out and speak, go out and teach, and make sure that they have something to listen to. It may be that we declare all the right things and people ignore us anyway, but at that point, they've heard better. They know better. They just refuse to accept it. And at that point, the blame is on them. Whereas if we just never talk, if we just never judge, if we just never say, hey, you're going down a bad path, if we never bring that up or address that with anyone, there's a problem there. Because no one is going to listen when we don't speak. Just be warned, when you do the Ezekiel, when you do the thing Jesus is telling you, which is, clear out your own eye, and then go and clear out your brother's eye, or at least try to. When you go and do that, it may not be very pleasant for you. And ultimately, I have to confess, I don't know exactly where to put this verse. I don't know exactly what Jesus is saying here. I've heard it interpreted a couple of ways, or I can see an interpretation that goes a couple of different ways, and so I'll propose both of them to you. It could be that this is a command. I've heard it said that this is the command of Jesus to give up at some point. You don't judge a book by its cover. You don't judge a person by just looking at them, right? It's not like, if I look at somebody and say, they have a tattoo, oh, well, they won't listen to Jesus if they have a tattoo, is the example that I was always told. I grew up in a fairly, very conservative area where tattoos were a sign of being super rough. I've lived in several places now where tattoos are just like kind of a way of life. People just have those, and that's fine, and it's relatively normal. So, that doesn't bother me much anymore, but I know places where it does bother people. And if you see someone who has, markings on them, then it's dangerous and they're not going to listen to God anyway. That's stupid. If you prejudge a person and you just never tell them the gospel because they look sketchy or they look like they won't listen, or you just don't like the look of that person, and so you're just not going to share the gospel with them, is that an accurate view of the gospel? Is that how Jesus operated? He saw the tax collectors and sinners. He saw the people in the worst positions in life, and instead of saying, well, they're going to reject it, he actually said, yeah, may as well preach to them. They're the sick ones. They need the help. If you see someone who is so far away from God as you are judging them to be, go and take God to them. They're the ones who need God the most. If they're truly so far from God, then they need him the most. Go talk to them about him. That's the important thing to do. But there is a point at which maybe you're just not supposed to anymore. Don't give what is holy to dogs. It's not that I prejudge someone as a dog. It's not that I look out and say, well, I don't like that person, so I don't think they'd listen to God at all. Or I don't like whatever aspect about that person, so I don't think they'd listen to God. It is that eventually, if you try 2 or 3 or 4 times with, say, a family member who's just not interested in God and keeps rejecting God over and over and over again, there is a point at which you can say, I have tried and you know where to find me, right? You know better. There's nothing else I can do if you keep ignoring me, so I'm just going to leave it here. And maybe they come around one day and maybe they don't, but they're rejecting it. They can't see the value in it, or they don't want to accept the value in it. They are the dogs. Well, okay. I'm trying to help you, but you made that decision for yourself, and so I step away, step back. It's not that I predetermine who won't listen, but it could be that Jesus is saying after a few tries, maybe you just give up and move on and try somewhere else. If all you ever do is try to convert the same person and you try 100 times with one person but 0 times with anyone else, well, maybe you should just spread your investment around. Maybe you should spread your time around a little bit. Maybe you should try 1 time with 100 different people instead of 100 times with one. Maybe you spend 5 times with 20 different people instead of 20 times with 5 individuals. Maybe different people need different amounts of investment and repeated attempts over and over and over again over the years, but maybe not. It could be that Jesus is saying there is a time and place to give up or to move on, or at least to say, okay, I've done what I can for now, and then move on. Maybe you come back later on, I don't know, but maybe you don't. And you just kind of leave that up to them. It could be that that's what Jesus is saying. The other alternative opinion that I've heard or seen or seen out of this passage is maybe this is just a warning comment. Maybe the warning comment is not, maybe the thrust of the argument is not so much don't give what's holy to the dogs, but it is they will turn and they will trample them, they will turn and they will tear you to pieces, which is the warning, which is to say, when you give what is holy to the dogs, right? If you're preaching, you're teaching all these important things to people, there are a lot of people who will not listen, and for some of those people who will not listen, you may reprimand them for their sin, and they'll come at you, and they will do some terrible things. They will say some words you don't like. They will accuse you of things you haven't done. They will do whatever it is to destroy you because they don't like what you're saying. Maybe this is just a warning, not a warning to say, hey, there's a point at which you time out and, you just can't help other people. So, or you just can't help this one person, so give up trying. It may not be that, or it may be that Jesus is not saying that. He's not saying just give up. It may be that Jesus is just saying, hey, as you go and warn people, be aware. Some of them are going to turn and fight back and not like what you have to say. And I don't really know which one it is. I tend towards probably the first interpretation. Don't give what is holy to dogs seems to be more the thrust of the argument. But at the same time, I don't know when to make that judgment on when someone is a dog or a pig or not. I'm not great at giving up and refusing to tell my friends when they're wrong, when my friend is actually wrong. I'm not very good at that. So I don't really know. How am I supposed to make that judgment? That's a whole different question that I really don't have the answer to. It may be that this is like Matthew 18, the passage in Matthew 18, where you're told to go and warn your brother up to a point and bring other people in and ultimately bring the church in. And if he won't even listen to the church, he is to be to you like the Gentiles and the tax collectors, someone you don't hang out with, right? Someone you don't spend time with, someone you don't invite in anymore. If someone has rejected God and he's rejected you as part of God's family, then don't spend time with them. At the same time, I know a lot of people who think Matthew 18 is not so much a call for absolute disfellowship as it is a call for renewing the effort to convert the person. Even when someone is so unrepentant that the church can confront them and that person is unfazed, even in that situation, there is still hope for the person to come back to God. And maybe that's what we're being called to do. Again, I lean towards the Matthew 18 being more about disfellowship than about more actively trying to convert the person again. But once the person aligns themselves with the world, once you fall away from Christ and become someone just in the world, well, I can still teach you. I can come back around and teach you and say, hey, let's talk about this, because at this moment you're lost and I would like to get you found again. I don't know exactly what to do with this. Is there a time where you judge someone and say, I've tried often enough, there's nothing I can do to help you anymore? Or is this just a call to say, when you help people, you may be burned over and over and over again, and be careful about it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is a moral commandment or more like a proverb, which is just more of a warning than it is an absolute binding command. I will leave that up to you to try and decipher. I think it's more of a command, but I have been wrong before, so I may be wrong on that as well. At the very least, I think we can agree that the job of helping others is difficult, and you need to know that going in. And you may keep in mind that sometimes all we can do is plant a seed, and someone may not be receptive now in 2026, but in 2036, maybe they come back around and remember that we tried to influence them, and maybe they reach back out at a later point. I don't exactly know. I don't know if it's command. I don't know if it's advice. Well, you have my thoughts on it, so I'll cut it there. The idea of do not judge is a big one, and people like to quote it. Even people who aren't Christians like to say, well, doesn't your Jesus say, don't judge? So, don't judge me because I'm not that bad, or whatever it is. That's really not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is not saying, do not judge ever because judgment is bad. Jesus is saying, be aware of what you're getting into. There are moments in which, if you are evil, you don't have a right to judge people. Fix yourself, hypocrite. Don't go out and try to convert someone else when you're not living a proper life. There's context to this, but also you are going to have to judge if you are faithful to him. Faithful Christians cannot accept sin. Matthew 18 is clear on that. If your brother sins or sins against you, then you need to go and correct him. Acts 5 is clear about that. Ananias and Sapphira come into the church and they lie to Peter's face, and so they are struck dead for it. 1 Corinthians 5 has a man living with his father's wife, or who has taken his father's wife. Immorality that is not even known among the Gentiles is known among you. What's the end of that chapter? The resolution of that is 1 Corinthians 5 is get rid of him, like kick him out. Don't let him into the church. He's not welcome there in such active and evil sin. Faithful Christians cannot accept sin. There are absolutely moments where we must judge. That is the righteous thing to do. That is the commandment. But we also have to be careful that if we judge others while we ourselves are living in sin, we're just disqualifying ourselves. Because that we're showing that we clearly have an understanding of what sin is, and then we continue to live in sin. How is God going to look on that? So be careful and be balanced, and ultimately remember that the final judgment is God's judgment. When I see evil in someone else, my gut reaction needs to start with looking at myself. An opportunity it is to check where I am, to check where I'm at, and how righteous I really am. And only once I've checked in with myself should I go and confront them. But I do need to confront them, because ultimately, when we do reach Judgment Day, you don't want someone turning to you and saying, like, you knew I was wrong and sinful, and you didn't say anything. You don't want it to be a surprise to people when Judgment Day appears. Do judge, but carefully. Don't judge if you're not going to be righteous. That's the message that Jesus has to say. And above all, just know, going into it, when you tell other people that they're wrong, they may not like that very much, and they may have some strong words or actions for you. That's it for the first part of Matthew 7, verses 1 through 6. Again, we have, I think, 2 more lessons in the Sermon on the Mount, and then we'll be done and moving on to a different topic on our Friday sessions. Next week, we'll have something else on Monday. I think I'm preaching on the Holy Spirit from Acts 2, and so, we'll see how that pans out, and if I can get that done. Then we have class on Wednesday as well. So I'll see you then.